Welcome to the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society. Welcome to ITSP Magazine. Every company has a story to tell, from the small startup to the large enterprise, and everything in between. This is one of them. Knowledge is power, now more than ever.
Marco.
Sean.
When was the last time you pretended to be a DJ and started scratching your records? I think you probably cherish them though. You probably don't actually get into
I don't. I try not to scratch the records, especially I don't consider myself much of a collectionist, but I try. So I'm not gonna scratch it, and I'm definitely not a DJ. I've never done that. So
we've had conversations with DJs. But the reason I bring that up is,
tell me the reason.
There's technology in an album, right? And the needle, and obviously the sound that comes through that. And people got creative and essentially hacked the records, right? To make new sounds and eventually mixing them together with different sounds and speeds.
I see where you're going.
Yeah.
So you're saying that maybe there is a technology that's been around for a while, but there are other ways to use it, more creative way to use it, more criminals way to use it, maybe.
Well, you can, however you choose to use it is up to you. But I guess my first point is you can hack a record, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But then records, clearly they still exist, but they didn't stick around as the mainstream right now. There are the CDs took over at some point. Now we have Spotify, but that didn't get rid of the DJ, right? And the scratching and the hacking of the music. So new technologies came in as well. And so my point of this is, just because there's a technology there doesn't mean you're free from, or an old technology that's not in wide use doesn't mean you're free from the bad things that can happen from it. And new technologies just bring new ways for people to get creative in how they manipulate it. And as you pointed out, Marco, it could be good or bad how they do it.
Just to start getting into the focus on the conversation, we're not talking about music, although we do love to talk about music. We're talking about something that is a dark side of creativity. It's the one that the criminal use. So, and we're talking about, let's say an old technology, not maybe as old as vinyl, but old for cybersecurity, chronological time, let's say, and but it's still around, and it's different now. So we're talking about DDoS attack.
Yes, distributed denial of service for those who I presume everybody knows who's listening to us, but there may be some who don't know what the DDoS stand for, distributed denial of service. And thankfully, Marco, we're not going to talk about music. We're going to talk about that, and we don't know enough about that. So we have a good friend on to help us understand this a little bit better, the old and the new of DDoS attacks and ransomware and all the other fun stuff that comes with it. David Elmaleh from Imperva, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you for having me.
I'm excited for this conversation. We had a tease of it the other day as we were preparing, and there's so much to cover. And the first order of business to dig into is, who is David, and what have you been up to? What's your role at Imperva?
Well, I'm leading the edge network and application security at Imperva, specifically also on the DDoS product lines. I've been, in fact, focusing for the last, I would say, 10 to 15 years on the service providers and networking industry. Lastly, before Imperva, I was, in fact, at Cisco, dealing with intelligent mobile network optimization and automation. And I decided, in fact, to move to the cybersecurity space. And DDoS is, I would say, the perfect place to be there, because it combines, I would say, both networking and network skills, but as well, the security side, in order to protect the customers' assets and infrastructure.
So, David, I mean, we were having fun with the music, and I'm sure at the beginning people didn't know what we were talking about. And as Sean said, probably a lot of people listening to this, they know what DDoS is. But from your perspective, we don't need to understand what it is, but to do understand what has become. So, in few words, why are we still talking about it?
This is a very good question. In fact, Marco, as you mentioned, this is something I would say not new. DDoS has been quite some time. In fact, in the news, I would say that this is although something which has constantly evolved. The techniques of the attacks to target customers have been evolving and taken advantage of new technologies. So we were mentioning, in fact, during the introduction about the older technologies, but in fact, I would say that DDoS has leveraged the evolution of the technology in order to, I would say, perform much stronger and much smarter attacks, which are becoming now bigger threats to customers. So that's why we see, in fact, more and more DDoS as part of the cybersecurity threat landscape. We do see, large DDoS attacks on the network layer and the application layer on different industries. That can be from, I would say, the online gaming, classical enterprise and corporates, in the financial services, healthcare. This is all over the place, really. And that's, again, thanks to, I would say, the evolution of the technology. Of course, we have, the network and the application have completely evolved across the past few years. And we have now new technologies such as 5G, IoT, as well as artificial intelligence, but also, as I said, new application design, which are basically providing more and more opportunities for attackers to perform DDoS attacks.
Yeah, and I definitely want to spend some time looking at the technologies on both sides, because clearly there's vectors in to attack, and or maybe the technology used to attack, and then the technologies that are being attacked, which are two different things. But before we do that, I want to get a sense of how this has evolved as the problem for organizations. Clearly, there's a design or a meaning for these criminals to attack an organization, to take it down. But we've seen things like ransomware, ransom DDoS, right? Where perhaps they don't actually even do the deed, but they hold the company ransom. So what are some of the other trends you're seeing with DDoS that can kind of paint a picture for what's going on? How big is this problem? Are there any industries, you mentioned a few, but are any industries that are more prone or targeted than others?
Yes, definitely. So in terms of, I would say, you mentioned a very good one related to ransom DDoS. This is something which has, I would say, emerged back end of 2020, and we have seen since then 4th or 5th waves of ransom DDoS. This is, I would say, an interesting technique, as you mentioned rightly, where the attackers are basically threatening the organization from DDoS attacks, which can, bring the service to a complete downtime and stop the availability and the business continuity for the customer. And we are also seeing different kind of attacks related, for example, to geopolitical situations. Such as the evolution now of the war in Europe. So we see a lot of attacks, for example, related to Ukrainian sites or Russian sites and infrastructure as well. There are also significant industries, where the business side is very important, such as supply chain and also gaming industries. Of course, the interest of I would say, of the business and the strong potential to get reward for the attackers on these industries is a strong motivator for them to launch attacks on these kind of verticals. They can launch it based on ransom, but also I would say just as standard DDoS attacks, which can last for quite some time. In fact, we do see a strong evolution in terms of the frequency and the duration and the repetition of the attacks. So, attackers really repeating the attack in order to make as much as possible impact on this business. And for example, that can be competition, just when there is, for example, as I said, online gaming or e-retail, e-commerce, to stop the competition from getting the business. This is quite powerful. And this is also something that we will discuss maybe later on, but to launch this kind of attacks is quite, I would say, easy, in fact, for to put in place. So, yeah.
And I want to pause you quickly, David, because we've had some other conversations with Imperva, and it's not all of them have been related to DDoS, but they do. A lot of the things we discussed have an impact on business. Bots, for example, may not take a service down, but can prevent a service from functioning like it's supposed to for those who it's supposed to function for. So just an example, bots buying products before the general public can get to them, right? And then perhaps reselling them on the black market for more money. The point I'm making there is that things happen that you don't always have control over. Bots, in my perspective, seem to be a little more manageable because there's some connection being made there, some authentication or some connection between one or more entities taking place. DDoS, on the other hand, seems a little more difficult to get my hands wrapped around and my head wrapped around in terms of how to protect against it. And I mentioned this the other day, that just like you can't stop somebody from suing another entity, right? The other entity just then has to prepare themselves for that and deal with it. And I feel DDoS is similar to that, where you can't stop somebody from doing that attack if they want to do it. So you have to be prepared for that. And I guess where I want to go with this is just this idea of, because you're talking about ransom. Is it possible for anybody to run a DDoS attack? Or are a lot of these cyber criminals that are holding the companies for ransom, are they calling bluff a lot of times? And if the companies don't pay, do they actually proceed with the attacks? What do you see?
It's a very good point. I would say that to answer, your first question of if it is easy to launch a DDoS attack, it is in fact quite easy. There are a lot of, on the dark web or the darknet tools which are available that are called booters or stressors in order, to launch this kind of attacks. And this is basically tools which are leveraging existing botnets, which are made of infected, devices. Remember, as we discussed previously, we have not only, I would say, computers and servers, but we have also cameras, for example, which were used by, the famous Mirai botnet. And we have, a lot of IoT devices. Anything can be used basically to launch DDoS because they can send basically traffic. So these tools are available for rent for quite a cheap price. It starts from really $5 for a few minutes of DDoS attacks, which can be already very impacting for a business. It can go a little bit up. Of course, if we talk about, the massive attacks that we have witnessed on our network for our customers, which are over 100, 500, or even 1 terabits, this is a bit more sophisticated and requires more synchronization and connectivity availability. So this is a little bit beyond that. But as you said, really, this is something which is at reach for most of the people to be able to disturb the business continuity of an enterprise.
So what I would like to look at, it's now a little bit of a bigger picture, right? Like with all that is happening in the world nowadays, we've been really understanding, I mean, not that we didn't know it before, but I think everybody's realizing that the supply chain is very complicated. And at the same time, it's very easy in a way to break, right? And you break that little point in the web of connection and the network, and everything kind of get affected by it. So can you bring some example of how a DDoS attack nowadays, maybe even leveraging new technology, can really disrupt our way of life, really?
Yes, that's really the case, Marco. So we have, seen several examples with attacks related to banks, for example, where we have seen that as part of, as I said, the geopolitical situation. So a lot of banks have been targeted on DDoS attacks. That's basically bringing the downtime to the entire service. So for you and me, that means that you cannot go to check your account balance. You cannot use your application. You don't even know what's happening. And basically that in fact creates a very interesting phenomena, because when people don't understand what's going on, they are starting to go a little bit crazy, and they start, to ping more and more basically the site of a bank. So that basically prevents it to come back afterwards, even from the DDoS attack. So that in fact increases the problem. So that's an example, for the banks, which by the end, we might discuss that afterwards a bit more in detail, but that's a brand reputation damage, because it basically, shows that you have not put in place the right defenses to be able to protect your infrastructure and your applications for your customers. There might be as well other attacks which have been done in parallel. We talk a lot about the DDoS smoke screen, to put the security teams, I would say, away from more sneaky attacks which are perpetrated on specific resources and application. And that also can lead, at like a data breach, which can be even more, I would say, problematic for a bank and for any company where the brand reputation is very, very severely damaged. Another example, just a quick one, is something that we also discussed as part of our latest Threat Landscape Report that was published recently, is with a supply chain related to vodka suppliers in Russia, where in fact there was an attack perpetrated on the shipping the services for just a few hours, but that completely stopped and halted the supply for the entire company, for the entire country, for more than 1 day. So you see here, in fact, that there is always an amplification of the impact for the business. It's not just during the attack that there is an impact. It's really afterwards what's going to happen, how long it's going to take you to recover, I would say on the security side, on the investigation, etc., but also on the actual impact for the end customers, the people who are actually consuming, these goods.
So let's stay here. So you mentioned that these large consequences. It also interests me a lot from a sociological perspective, this overreaction, right? I'm thinking like the stock market, the bad news come out and everybody goes crazy, but you have in place a certain system that can stop the trading, for example, so you avoid this escalation of a problem, of really affecting the market. Thinking of this, I'm like, are now in place, because we started saying that this is a problem that's been around for a long time. So apart from the evolution of the evil, how about the evolution of the good guys that are protecting this, the blue teams and everybody in the cybersecurity industry? Are we doing something to prevent, see when it happened, contain it, react to it? Where are we standing with that?
Of course, definitely. This is, the evolution of the, I would say, the good guys and the bad guys is, I would say, has to happen in parallel, or at least I would say the good guys have have really to be very fast in order to be able to protect from all these threats. So there has been definitely an evolution. If we talk a little bit in summary, I would say that the traditional, when we talked about the old records, right, the traditional DDoS was, if we talk about the vinyl, right, the old disks, they were more like around the basic firewalls, the basic routers that you put in your data center in order just to filter as much as you could of the illegitimate traffic. Afterwards, we have seen other devices such as IPS, IDS, in order to be a little bit more intelligent. But remember, we see now, I would say, really an explosion. This is really exponential. The technology is really growing exponentially with the coming of all these 5G and IoT technologies. And now the requirements related, I would say, on DDoS, you have the goal is to exhaust basically the resources of a specific target. And in order to do that, the magnitude is going really to increase. So with this traditional approach, now you have basically a box which is able to handle something specific, but with the amount now of data which is being sent to bring it down, it's not possible to do it. So you need basically to leverage something beyond. From that, the evolution of the good guys was, to look at, I would say, local networks such as service providers, ISPs, which have a little bit more capacity and are able also to absorb this kind of attacks. And they can basically provide some protection. However, this has also shown its limit, since large attacks are going to be also impactful for their own infrastructure, and basically the targets are becoming what we call noisy neighbors, right? So they are in fact impacting the other customers of the same service provider. So now what's I would say the latest evolution? It's all about going to very large global networks, not only local, but global, like cloud networks. And here it's about leveraging the global capacity and the fact that, as you rightly mentioned, Sean, the attacks by nature are distributed denial of services. It means that they are launched on very various locations across the globe. And the idea now is to mitigate these attacks by leveraging points of presence, which are also distributed and that are able really to block all the malicious traffic as close as possible to the source of the attack, wherever it's coming from, for example, Brazil or USA or China, etc. So that's an evolution related to I would say the architecture of the solution. It's shifting really progressively from, I would say, the on-premise approach and the box approach to something which is much bigger and running in the cloud in order to protect, I would say, the infrastructure. This is for the first part. There are also other evolutions, but I will pause here just to see if you have other questions, Marco. But there are also evolutions related to the techniques as well that the good guys are employing in order to mitigate and protect.
Well, I definitely want to get deeper into that, and I can kind of see three angles to take there, and we'll see how we cover these. It first might be how, and you described some of the new technologies that are being used to exploit organizations. 5G and IoT and AI are being used to conduct the attacks. I presume those same technologies are being attacked. So maybe that's one part. How are companies exposing themselves in new ways that they didn't before that just makes this even easier? The next is what do you look for, right? And for signs of that might be possible or happening before it scales up. And then what other ways you can protect yourself. So let's start with the exposure piece. Are new technologies making it easier for the bad actors to conduct these activities? Cloud and microservices, and Marco touched on the supply chain. doesn't just have to be the shipping company delivering the vodka where everybody stocks up on vodka because they don't want to miss out. But it could be a microservice that's used across many applications that gets taken down, right? And many companies are impacted by that one denial of service. So how can organizations maybe recognize the exposure, and perhaps are there ways they can begin to mitigate some of that exposure just the way they build their systems and applications and processes and whatnot?
So this is a very good point indeed, Sean. If we talk about, I would say the application architecture, yes, there is a strong evolution. I would say from monolithic applications to microservices-based application, and the very wide usage of APIs as well. In fact, we at Imperva also provide API security, and we are always, I would say, pleased to see that one of the first points that the customers, when experiencing our product related to API, is I would say about discovering the exposure, as you mentioned, because many times they are not even aware that they have so many APIs and microservices exposed and which are under risk. And that's really about, I would say, again, that's the evolution which has been faster than that the people could cope with, and the adoption is here. Everybody says we need to adopt new technologies to get more business productivity, but security is a little bit lagging behind about the implementation of best practices, and that's why it's very important, first of all, to, I would say, pause and understand, okay, what is my exposure, and then having a capability here to put technology in order to identify all the API calls and the different between the different microservices, and to map that for the customers and understand what is exposed and what needs to be protected. So that's one, I would say, first point in terms of best practice, I would say, for the customer. And the second one is around putting the right defenses in place. So, for applications, I would say web application standard, web application firewall, as we also, I would say, provide at Imperva, is a very important practice, and is going to be able to protect, from the different OWASP top 10 attacks, including DDoS protection and DDoS attacks on the layer 7. And then, to define for at the minimum, I would say, for APIs rate limiting, but also, and here we are going to the, I would say, the more advanced thing, because you asked me about, what's happening, how do you define basically, the attacks. The same, in fact, way that we have machine learning being used by the attackers in order to define and vary across time. The time can be very short. Attack vectors on the same target in order really to have a strong chance of being successful on the attack. On the other side, we also need to apply this kind of techniques and machine learning in order to identify legitimate and bad traffic. This is very, very important because, as part of DDoS mitigation, you want to make sure that the business continuity is happening. So there is the resources are available for your customers, but also that you are not having what we call false positives, so blocking legitimate customers, which can also have a very, very negative impact, because at the end, it's going to be, I would say, almost the same result if, the legitimate users are not able to access. In fact, the DDoS has been successful. So it's very important to have the possibility of distinguishing. And for that, and I will conclude here related to the machine learning, you define basically different models that are applied in order to identify, I would say, traffic patterns. In general, if we talk about layer 3 and 4, location, based on the location, the services which are being run on the customer, but also on the flow, related to the application, which kind of services are being accessed, which one are not, and then based on that, you can really understand with great granularity what is in fact malicious and what is not.
I love that you went there, because I wanted to talk to you about the signals, and it sounds like that's super important, right? To understand what's about to happen, what is happening, and the potential impact of that near term and long term. And you mentioned business continuity, and so where I want to go with you next, David, is kind of the I guess the programming of this, the security program part of this conversation, where organizations recognize they are prone, they don't know what to do about it. How do they take some of the first steps? So where are you seeing organizations coming up against some of the challenges in taking that first step? How connected is that to business continuity and disaster recovery? Because what I'm trying to figure out is, do companies just say, this is too big of a problem for me to take on, or is that a misconception, or kind of where are things sitting from a preparedness perspective? How are companies moving?
I would say that we see, many companies which are, I would say, taking the issue with the standard approach as we discussed, right? So thinking that, I would say the first misconception, and this is I would say the most problematic one, is to think that you are not at risk. Really, that's the thing that is really impacting for the customers. Thinking that they will not get DDoSed, but then when they get it, it's too late, right? So because they have not put the right defenses in place, and it's really too late in the sense that the damage is done, and it's going to be very hard to recover. So the first thing is to bring, I would say, awareness and understand where basically you are in which segment, knowing that, again, most of the segments are really targeted, I would say, with more or less magnitude, but nobody is, I would say, safe from a DDoS attack, simply because, as we explained, this is so easy to perform. Now, for these companies, for example, you will have ransom DDoS, which is going to be somebody who is going to launch a threat. In many cases, what we have seen is that the threat actually happens. It's a small attack which is being launched, and suddenly, and this is an interesting, I would say, reaction, this becomes really a board level problem, right? So, I've been myself sitting with several customers who have, in fact, contacted us. They were not customers, but contacted us because they got a ransom and they needed immediate instant protection because they didn't do, unfortunately, their homework, and they experienced a first attack, which was just, warning sign, but already with just this small warning, they understood that they are completely not protected, although they put in place the standard, the vinyl or CD, let's call it, protection, right? With the firewall and the ISP, and now they understand that this is not sufficient. They need to put something in place. So this is where the business continuity comes to place. The board is involved, and they need to ensure that they can handle this kind of attacks. In the case that it is being perpetrated, the massive one, which is being threatened. And for that, we have also developed on our end, I would say, emergency onboardings, where we can help the customers, although, again, they didn't prepare themselves, I would say, in the best way, to have instant onboarding to our solution in order to be protected. But really, the recommendation is being more aware and understand, what the protection do. I would say an inventory of what you have in place. Look if you have, again, something which is adapted to your needs in terms of the risk and in the segment where you are, and define the right strategy, define as well the right processes with your teams in order to have the right runbooks to react and to prepare accordingly, and of course select the right solution.
Quickly, David, I know Marco wants to jump in, but is it a dial, the protection against the risk? So if the risk is high, the protection measures dial high. What does that look like?
I would say that I would say you want to be protected regardless of the risk. If you are, I would say, thinking in the right way. However, as I said, many customers are going to think, yeah, I'm not at risk, so maybe I will do something if something happens. But that's in many cases, again, too late because the attack has already happened. The ransom is one use case, as we said, because you have a warning sign, but sometimes there is no warning sign and you're already down. And so I would say that regardless of what you believe as an organization, it is really important to be well protected. And to be well protected, it has to have several defense mechanisms. Not only I would say the traditional one that everybody has, the firewall. That's okay, but that's very, very basic. But also, as I said, the cloud protection to be able to protect from massive attacks. Application firewalls as well to protect from the OS top 10, and as well, you discussed about the bot management. This is somehow, I would say, linked also to DDoS because DDoS are launched by botnets, so it's also very important, and the API security to protect, the API and microservices. So I would say that for any kind of organization which is, looking at maintaining the business continuity, and I believe that that's the case for really most of the organization, this is important not to downplay the security side.
So as we start wrapping here, I'm just trying to figure out, is there ever going to be the end of this? Of course, it's a rhetoric question because there isn't.
Yes, just like the records have gone.
Yeah, well,
there
except
are no more
it does,
albums anymore.
That's a good thing in a way, but this one is not. But what I'm imagining, I'm going to go back to the coordination, right? So you can coordinate a response, a readiness internally. But you as Imperva, as a company, you have tons of customers. So you see a lot of signals. You see what is happening. And I'm wondering, and I go back to the stock market exchange example, is like when you see something, that some alert are coming down, I'm wondering what kind of coordination can be done on a higher level so that kind of like an umbrella reaction, an umbrella protection between many different customers. And if it's maybe in their own hands for private sector, I'm thinking hospitals. I mean, we hear about that. I'm thinking, again, supply chain. I'm thinking stuff that can eventually affect everyday people. So kind of like a look into the future of what you see could be improved from an overall point of view.
That's a very, very wide question, Marco. I think it's definitely, as you mentioned, the thing is not going to go away simply because, again, the technology is continuing to evolve and the techniques will continue to evolve, and the defense technology will need also to evolve. I would say that, first of all, related to your first point about, the signals. This is very important indeed, and that's part also, as I mentioned to Sean previously, related, to the machine learning, and that's basically the way to leverage the distribution and the global network in order to aggregate all these signals. Something that is definitely not possible, I would say, for a single customer or even for a corporate, because their, I would say, exposure, although it's important, but the data that is available related to attacks is very, very limited. While when you protect thousands of customers, it's something that you can leverage, in fact, to implement new protection mechanisms in real time, but also based again on historical data, in order to protect the other customers, which are potential threats for these attacks. Now, related to the what should we do? I think that there is a need definitely to make DDoS a thing from the past. Right? This is something that is, I would say, our mission. That's not easy, of course, but that requires a lot of new techniques to implement to again protect the assets of the customers, but also integration points. Remember that we talked about the distribution part of the DDoS, and it means that basically the source of the attacks are more and more important. And to go to Sean's point a little bit, I would say that before, the attacks were originating from specific botnets and specific providers, but now, due to the change of the network infrastructure globally, the number of points of sources is incredible. That means, in fact, that I would say the evolution of that is that the mitigation will have to run in adoption of this granularity. So let's say that previously, if we take the analogy, in fact, of if we can take a few seconds on that, of how you basically only consume your services streaming, like Netflix, etc. I would say at the beginning you would have to reach out, to regional servers, right, related to your streaming video. But now, because of the demand, right, of these services, we have, what we call edge locations, which are placed in very, very high granularity in towns, and it's not anymore in regions, in countries, it's in towns and in specific, in fact, areas. So the data is available in all these specific locations. And it means that we have infrastructure available now with high granularity, which can be used to launch attacks, and the mitigation will need to evolve. We talked about, the global network with tens or hundreds of points of presence. I would say that it will have to be deployed and coordinated in a much wider scale, where we will have it, running at all these edge nodes, as we call it.
I love this view, David, because I think that really answers a lot of the questions I have with respect to, well, how does an organization prepare themselves to be resilient in the case of a DDoS attack? And it's really all about demand, right? And so what demand do you expect? What demand might you see from malicious perspective? And how do you architect, design, build, deploy, manage, and monitor your environment in a way that meets your demand, but can also then burst and scale and protect from unwanted, illegitimate demand? And I think you touched on a lot of different points as well, that it's not just one piece of mitigation. It's not just DDoS mitigation. It's not just an application firewall, web application firewall. It's not just API protection. It's a combination of those and some smart thinking with the folks of Imperva to help when it's right to do that, and really setting up the environment to be resilient in all cases. And I know for many of these situations, having an understanding of what the scope is, what the trends are, what the impact might look like is super helpful in preparing for these and putting a plan together and building out a program. And I know you have a report that you put together recently on DDoS that covers some of these things, which I think would be very helpful for organizations to digest, so they can either take their current plan and say, okay, how do we measure up against what Imperva is seeing? Or if there is no plan, how do we take those first steps to prepare and plan for legitimate demand that we want, and also the illegitimate traffic? So I don't know, great conversation. We didn't stick with the music all the way through. I'm a little bummed about that, but No, I'm just kidding. No, but I think it's an important conversation. To your point, David, if you think you're not at risk, think again, because just the supply chain point. You're providing a service somewhere, and if somebody can't get it, you play a role in the bigger picture somehow, some way. So, I don't know. Any final thoughts, David, for folks? Maybe a tip for how to get started, or maybe something from the report that you think is important that we didn't touch on yet?
Yes, definitely, and thanks for mentioning that, Sean. There is in fact, I would say, several reports. We issued the latest one, Q2, which is available online, and that people can read and get a lot of very good insights related, to the trends on application attacks, network level attacks as well, and see really the as we exposed during this interview, all the evolution and the increase basically of a problem of DDoS. So I do believe that will be very interesting for people to look at these reports, and to continue also looking at these reports, because they are going to be released on a continuous basis for people really to get awareness and understand where they are. And there are also plenty of available resources, on our website related to best practices, how to select, I would say, the approach, and I would say the processes that you need to put in place to help basically people again define a strategy around business continuity. And for example, as well, decide to put in place a resiliency approach. For example, where you have already a provider and you want to have a backup solution as well. This is something that we see also a trend coming up. The technology again is really evolving, and we see now this massive move to the cloud transformation. But even the clouds also, they are not protected from downtimes and outages, right? So that's something that all the customers who are looking again to make sure that they have a resiliency plan and business continuity need to look at and make sure that they have a safety net, right? So this is very important, very, very important. And here it goes even beyond, as you rightly mentioned, Sean and Marco, it goes beyond DDoS. It's really about how do I make sure that during critical times, I can be online and can make business revenue, right? This is very important. I would say, especially now with the holiday season, shopping season coming, that's going to be a very interesting period for sure. We would expect an increase in the attacks now, because that's going to be a lot, I would say, interesting for, unfortunately, for the attackers to make some damages there. So, really, my advice to our auditors here is do a preparation, have a look again, and make sure you have the right defenses in place. Defenses again on attacks, but also, as I said, on the network resiliency. And one additional very small point that I wanted to mention is related also to legitimate traffic. And sometimes we can have, in fact, kind of DDoS. You remember, Sean and Marco, I mentioned about the bank. So we can have, in fact, when there is a rush, it can create, in fact, a good DDoS, what we call a good DDoS. So it's very important to be prepared for that. On that end, also at Imperva, we have introduced a solution called waiting room, which is helping, in fact, to control the access to the application without overloading it and making it unavailable. So that's very important, again, in the same story, but here we are not talking about, in fact, an attack. We are just talking about massive spikes of traffic, which also needs to be handled properly in order to make sure that the business continuity is achieved, your revenue is not impacted, and the user experience is very smooth.
Yes, the false positive.
Yeah, well, that's another place where we could go. But I think you summarize it very well. In my head, I'm thinking, the being prepared means to think about what could stop your business from working, right? I mean, it's up to you to decide what are the most relevant things that could go wrong. Even that little thing that go wrong could block your business, right? I mean, if you are a coffee shop, I think it's important that your coffee machine is going to work, or you're not going to do business, right? So maybe if you're connected to the internet, DDoS attack there, that's a problem. But also if the pipe for the water breaks, you want to be sure that you have a backup plan. Anyway.
Is that a DDoB, distributed denial of barista? I don't know.
Of caffeine. I think that's, we'll figure that out. Anyway, great conversation. I think a lot to think about, not just from the technological aspect, but from the business aspect for being ready. And yeah, again, Sean, a lot to think about. And I'm never disappointed by our conversation with Imperva. This time was with David. And we're looking forward for many more of this. So thank you very much. And what there will be in the notes.
Yeah, in the meantime, links to David's profiles. You can connect with him and have a chat with him if you need to learn more. Link to the report, the latest one for DDoS. And of course, we encourage everyone to look at all the different offerings we touched on today, because I think they all play a part in this particular scenario. So thanks, David, and thanks, Marco, for great combo. I think it's time to go spin some vinyl.
Some vinyl, yeah.
Right, and start spin the vinyl and build out a anti-DDoS program. So that's the plan. All right, everyone. Thanks so much, David. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marco. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you learned something new and this story made you think, then share itspmagazine.com with your friends, family, and colleagues. We hope you will come back for more stories and follow us on our journey. You can always find us at the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society.